What is up, guys? So this video is titled How to Start a Startup on a Shoestring Budget. And if you're new to this channel, my name's Alex, and I started a sports data company with my best friend from college, and we had no investors. We put in approximately $20,000, maybe $25,000 total. That's it. And within 3.5 years, we sold that business for $160 million to a public company. To be honest, we could have started by putting in even less money. We didn't even need to put in the full 25,000 bucks. So the point of this video is to explain how to start a startup very cheaply. And there's a few reasons why this can be beneficial. So the first thing is when you decide to raise money, of course, it comes with strings attached. First and foremost, you're giving up a percentage of your company. So if you go out, you raise a seed round, you're oftentimes giving up 5, 10, 15, 20% even of your business before you even get started just to raise a little initial capital. Honestly, most of the most successful businesses ever started, like Facebook, had investors. I've invested in companies, so it's not necessarily a horrible idea to take VC funding, but you have to remember when you decide to accept funding, number one, you're giving up a percentage of your baby. You're giving up some of your company. And also, you now have a boss. Money comes with strings attached. You're going to be spending a lot of time fundraising, giving your investors updates, what's going on at the company. And when you're an entrepreneur, what you really should be focused on is building a great product and growing that product, right? Growing revenue. That's what you want to be focused on as a founder. The reason we never raised money is we didn't want to have to deal with VCs. I didn't want to have to send out investor memos every single week and be on the road traveling to raise more money. I just wanted to focus on building the product that I loved and I believed other people would love. Those are a couple of the reasons why at first I believe it's a good idea for every company to try to start on a shoestring budget. And of course, you can always raise money. If you launch a product, because most products, most startups can be launched extremely cheap, and that's what we're going to talk about. For example, MailChimp was a completely bootstrapped company. They raised basically no outside money, and this company was bought by Intuit for $12 billion. So you do not need to raise money to have a successful startup. But one of the many reasons why I encourage founders to try to get things going, to start on a shoestring budget, is if you start getting traction and you haven't raised any capital, once you decide, hey, we're on the right path, we're getting a lot of traction, we're building something that customers actually want, you can go out and raise money at a higher valuation. If you decide to raise your seed round at $50,000 a month in monthly revenue versus $0, you are going to get a much better valuation, which means for $1 million check, you have to give up much less of your company compared to if you're a company who doesn't even have a product or any revenue yet. So one of the many benefits of trying to launch your startup on a very cheap shoestring budget is even if you decide to ultimately raise, you are going to get much better valuations. Investors are going to flock to you. If you're making $50,000, $25,000 a month in revenue, you're talking to customers, actually building something valuable that they want, you're going to get much better terms from these venture capitalists. They can provide a lot of value, but at the end of the day, you have to remember it's a business. If they can take 10% of your company for a $250,000 check because you're a pre-revenue company, they're going to do that all day long if you have a great idea. Let's get into it. So the best way to start a startup on a shoestring budget and literally have to spend close to $0 is if you don't actually build the product. I know that sounds a little crazy, but this is actually how Dropbox started. Dropbox is obviously a huge success in the tech industry. It's a multi-billion-dollar company. A lot of people probably think, oh, Drew Houston, he raised a ton of money, he started building out Dropbox, and then it exploded. That's not how it worked. Drew Houston, he was constantly forgetting his thumb drive at MIT, and he had this idea for, hey, a file syncing platform that ultimately would become Dropbox would be really valuable. I'm having this problem. But what he wasn't sure of, do other people have this problem and are they willing to pay for it? So instead of actually building out Dropbox and starting to sell it, what he ended up doing is just recording a demo video of this is what Dropbox would look like once it's built. And he just posted that video. That video went viral. He had like 75,000 people sign up for the Dropbox waiting list within the first week or so. And from that point on, he realized he was onto something. He was actually building something that people wanted. And obviously, when you have 75,000 people sign up for your waiting list, you know you're solving an important problem, and it's really easy to raise money at favorable terms, which is what he ended up doing. So the biggest issue most entrepreneurs have is they just want to raise money and start building something, but they're not even sure that people are going to pay for it, that they want it. There's a lot of founders who just always think they're right. They don't want to talk to customers. They just want to build. They just want to code and then release their product. And there's a lot of founders I even know personally who raise a bunch of money, they go build a product and spend 6 months, a year on it. And then when it ultimately comes time to monetize, to sell that product, they realize nobody wants it, or nobody is willing to pay for it. That's the last thing you want to happen. Nothing is better than knowing, hey, I have a ton of customers waiting for me once I actually build this. So in the case of Drew Houston, he didn't even have to build something out. He started with close to $0. All he had to do was record a video and get a domain up for an email waiting list. So extremely genius. You can literally oftentimes start businesses and validate ideas with $0. All you're doing as a startup is you are solving customer problems. You are building something that makes people's lives better that they want to pay for. So if you can validate that in a really cheap way with a video without doing a ton of engineering work and needing to raise a ton of money, you are going to be in a much better spot. That is kind of similar to how it worked with OddsJam. When I was building OddsJam, I was currently, at the time, I was a quantitative trader, and I started to think, hey, I like gambling. You know, I was gambling all day in financial markets at work. I like going home and placing bets. I started to think like, wow, there's 20 sports books that have launched in Pennsylvania, the state I was living in at the time. I was a quant trader at Susquehanna. So I started to think, I would really like a Bloomberg terminal for sports betting. I go into work and I have a fancy Bloomberg terminal that really helps me find profitable trades. But when I go home to bet on sports, I'm searching around for bets manually. There's no Bloomberg terminal for sports betting where I can compare lines, where I see line discrepancies. There was nothing like that. So I started to think, I have this problem. But do other people? Are there even other data-driven sports bettors, or is it just a ton of degenerates who want to bet on parlays? So I started to research. I saw that there were other people who were asking the same question. You know, I started OddsJam shortly after sports betting legalized in the US, and I saw there were a lot of other people who wanted their own personal Bloomberg terminal for sports betting and were willing to pay for it. But we didn't go out, raise a ton of money, and try to build the perfect product. The initial version of OddsJam, we launched on a shoestring budget, as little as possible. We only had a few sports books. Our refresh speeds were very slow. The site was constantly crashing. But once we built the initial product, we started selling. We went out and we started talking to customers. What do you like? What do you not like? What do you pay for this? What sports books do we have to add for you to actually pay for this? And some people would tell us, it's a cool idea, but you have to add these 10 sports books before I consider paying. So even though we only had a couple, the main ones like FanDuel and DraftKings, we realized, okay, we need to go add BetMGM, Fanatics. And once we started to get some traction, some early users, some early adopters, the most passionate sports bettors, we were able to reinvest that money into ultimately adding out a bunch of new features, as well as adding in data feeds from a ton of different sports books. So we started with only 3 sports books, and at this point, OddsJam has well over 200 sports books. We started with very slow refresh speeds. Now on OddsJam, odds are updated in less than a second. So long story short, you're never gonna start with the perfect product. You really need to try to launch as cheap as possible and get it in the hands of customers, and then just listen to their feedback. If you're actually listening to customers and you're talking to them, they will tell you, here's what I want you to add. Here's what I will pay for. Here's what I hate about your product. Here's where your product is confusing. If you add this, I will pay even more money. So always try to launch your product as cheap as possible. Drew Houston from Dropbox did it in the best possible way, but I have some other examples of founders who created absolutely amazing companies and they started very cheap. And this isn't possible for every business, but this is the ideal. The ideal situation is you know you're working on a problem customers actually have, you validate that, you get early feedback from the market, and then you can determine, do I even want to raise money in the first place? Or maybe you just want to bootstrap the business like I did, where you own 100% of the equity and you have all decision-making power. You decide what you want to do. You control your own time. You don't have a boss. You determine when you want to sell the company or when you don't want to sell the company. And I think that's obviously the best thing as a founder, is you have complete control. So as an entrepreneur, it's absolutely critical to be scrappy. You want to preserve equity and preserve money until you're sure that you're working on a technology or on a product that people actually want and are ready to pay for. And there's limitless examples of this. For example, GoPro, now a super popular company. It started out, the founder literally, he taped a $3 camera to his wrist and he just filmed. That was the initial version of GoPro. Morning Brew, which was acquired for $75 million, a financial newsletter, it started out as basically free. They were just using a MailChimp account and sending business news summaries to students at the University of Michigan. So if you're scrappy, if you want to start on a shoestring budget, the first thing I recommend is to think about, do I even need to build this product? Or can I just do some type of demo, promote it on social media, Reddit, and see if people are actually interested? Because the worst thing you can do is raise a ton of money or spend a ton of your own personal money building something that it turns out people don't actually want and they're not willing to pay for. You want to build your MVP in the cheapest way possible, which oftentimes means you don't even have to build the product. You can just record a video. You can make a demo, and the product doesn't actually function, but it works enough to give a little demo and record a little YouTube video that you can then promote online. Again, all of this is going to help you save time, money, and also if you end up raising money, it's going to help you preserve equity and control over your own company. So I hope you enjoyed this video. Obviously, I'm speaking from my experience, and I hope you enjoyed it. So if you have any questions, let me know, drop them in the comments. You can also let me know other video ideas you want to see. I love making business content, startup content, sports betting content, all different types of content, just sharing my ideas online. So I hope you enjoyed this, guys.